When I picked up the phone to ask my son Mark about the date of his wedding, I expected the kind of news a mother treasures. A day to circle on the calendar. A moment to hold close to the heart. Instead, my daughter-in-law Lauren looked me squarely in the eye and, with a smile that sent a chill down my spine, said words that would change everything. "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." For a moment, it felt as if the floor had been ripped from beneath me. Special people, that was what she called them. And in that instant, I understood that after 3 years of paying their rent every month, of filling their refrigerator when they had nothing to eat, of buying every piece of furniture in their apartment, I was not one of those special people. I stood in the living room of my own home holding the phone. Its weight suddenly unbearable. My son couldn't even meet my eyes while Lauren sank comfortably into the sofa I had bought for them. As if she were queen of the house. Upstairs in my closet hung the pale pink dress I had chosen for her wedding. Carefully paired with new shoes. An outfit I had imagined myself wearing proudly in photographs that would never exist. $200 I had set aside to look elegant on Mark's big day. Believing I would be captured forever in the smiles and embraces of that moment. Instead, those items now dangled uselessly in the shadows. A cruel reminder of an invitation that never came. For weeks, I had prepared. I had tucked away $1,000 as a wedding gift. I had called my sister Diana in Chicago to share the excitement. I had polished and scrubbed my house until it gleamed, imagining they might come celebrate here after the ceremony. Every dream collapsed with those 4 poisoned words, "Only special people." Mark finally forced himself to look up at me and, in a voice that sounded rehearsed, said, "Mom, it was intimate. Just the 2 of us and the witnesses." But I had already seen the truth splashed across social media. I saw Lauren's parents glowing beside the bride and groom. I saw her siblings raising glasses of champagne. Their laughter caught in snapshots for the world to admire. I saw her in that white dress. The one I had helped finance with $800 the month before for what she had called personal expenses. I saw everything I wasn't meant to see. Exactly 1 week later, after I had sat with the humiliation until it hardened into something colder, Lauren called me again. Her voice was not smug now, it trembled with desperation. "Maggie, the rent is overdue. The landlord says if we don't pay this week, he'll kick us out. You forgot to make the transfer." I sat in silence, letting her words hang in the air like smoke. I remembered every trip I had rushed to make to the bank. Every sacrifice of my own comfort to ensure they had a roof. I remembered beans and rice dinners for myself so they could have meat on their plates. And now, after they had barred me from their wedding, she was asking as if nothing had changed. "Lauren," I said, my voice calm but sharp as steel. "Didn't I warn you that I only help special people?" The silence on the line was deafening. For the first time in years, it was not I who trembled, but her. "Maggie, I don't understand," she stammered, her voice suddenly small. "We were always special to you. You're like a second mom to me." Lies. Lies wrapped in honey. The same sweetness she had used to ask me for money for the dress. For the honeymoon. For the rings. Rings I had unknowingly financed without ever seeing exchanged. For too long, I had lived this way. Walking on eggshells. Measuring each word, each gesture, each gift, in the hope of earning a morsel of affection from my own son. I had been the perfect mother. The obliging mother-in-law. The silent provider who swallowed her pain whenever they treated her like air. But that phrase, "only special people," was the spark that lit a fire I didn't know still smoldered. That night, I calculated everything in my head. The rent, the groceries, the emergencies, the whims. It was over $20,000 already. Money torn from my retirement. From the savings Robert had left to keep me secure. What had it bought me? To stand on the outside of my own son's life, watching strangers toast in my place. I cried that night, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of anger, of years of humiliation finally crashing down. I cried for the woman who had allowed herself to become invisible. Who had believed that love could be bought. Who had lost herself in trying to be indispensable to people who considered her dispensable. When I awoke the next morning, something inside me had shifted forever. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was resolve. I looked in the mirror at the same weary eyes. The same lines of a life spent giving. But behind them I found a hardness I had never dared to acknowledge. A determination that had been buried under years of silence. I brewed coffee as I had every morning for 4 decades. But this time I didn't wait for a call from Mark. Didn't check my phone hoping for apologies that would never come. For the first time in years, I was my own first concern. I sat at the kitchen table where I had planned surprises for them. Counted their bills, and swallowed my tears. Now it became the place where I would reclaim my life. I spread out my checkbook and bank statements. The truth had to be put in numbers, carved into paper so I could no longer deny it. 3 years of rent, $18,000, food and supplies, another $7,200, gifts for every occasion, $3,000, Lauren's medical emergencies, $800, the car loan they never repaid, $2,500, the air conditioner repair, $600, the furniture in their living room, $1,200, altogether, $33,400. That was the sum of my generosity. That was the exact measure of my blindness. Money I had saved penny by penny over decades. Money Robert had left me to age with dignity. Poured out like water into the hands of 2 adults who couldn't even pretend to respect me. The phone rang. Mark's name appeared on the screen. My heart, which once would have leapt, now stayed still. I let it ring until it stopped. Minutes later, it rang again, Lauren this time. I ignored it. A text came through. Mom, please answer. We need to talk. I deleted it without a thought. And with that, for the first time in years, I felt something like freedom that afternoon. For the first time in years, I went for a walk with no purpose other than wanting to feel the air on my face. No errands for Mark. No trips to the bank for Lauren. No emergencies that drained the life out of me. Just a walk. I passed the park where I had once taken Mark as a child. Remembering how that little boy had clung to my hand and told me I was the best mom in the world. When had that sweet boy turned into a man who looked at me and saw only a bank account with legs? When had I started believing that love could be purchased? I stopped at the bank, where I had so often been the dependable customer sending off transfers that bled me dry. Behind the glass, Mr. Thomas Blake, the branch manager, waved. He had known me for years, had processed every payment to Mark and Lauren, had silently watched my account shrink with each automatic withdrawal. This time, I walked directly into his office and said, Mr. Blake, I need you to cancel the transfers I've been making. All of them, and I want you to tell me how to protect my accounts so that no one else can touch my money. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. Are you sure, Mrs. Harris? Did something happen? His voice carried genuine concern. More genuine than any interest my own son had shown in months. What happened? I said, staring him straight in the eye. Is that I finally opened my eyes. As he typed on his computer, my phone buzzed and rang over and over. Mark, then Lauren, then Mark again. It was as if they had some sixth sense that their source of income was being cut off. I turned the phone off completely and signed the papers with a steady hand. When Mr. Blake handed me the documents, he hesitated. Mrs. Harris, forgive me for intruding, but I've seen you give so much to your family over the years. I just hope you're not being pressured into this. I almost laughed at the irony. No, Mr. Blake, for once, I'm not being pressured. I've finally stopped pressuring myself. When I stepped out of the bank, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of obligation, of guilt, of fear had lifted. For the first time in a decade, my money was mine. I walked home, imagining the trips I had never taken, the friends I had neglected, the simple pleasures I had denied myself. But when I turned onto my street, my stomach dropped. 3 cars were parked in front of my house, Mark's, Lauren's, and one I didn't recognize. Through the window, I could see movement inside. They had keys. Of course they did. I had trusted them enough to give them keys, believing they would one day protect me as I had protected them. But as I stood outside, gathering myself, I knew that trust had been an illusion. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped inside. The sight froze me. Mark sat hunched on my sofa with his head in his hands. Lauren paced the floor like a trapped animal, her eyes darting, restless, and at my dining table, An older man in a gray suit was flipping through my personal documents as if he had every right in the world. "What is happening here?" My voice came out louder than I expected. All three turned toward me, their expressions a strange mix of surprise and guilt, as if I were the intruder in my own home. Lauren rushed to speak first, her tone urgent. "Maggie, thank God you're here. We need to talk. This is Mr. Fisher, from the law firm we consulted about your situation." "My situation?" The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "What situation? I'm doing perfectly fine." Mark finally lifted his head. His eyes, once so innocent, now carried only the sharp edge of panic. "Mom, we went to the bank, and they told us you cancelled all the transfers. Mr. Blake said you even blocked us from your accounts. We don't understand why." The lawyer, Paul Fisher. He introduced himself, extended a hand that I refused to shake. Instead, I marched straight to the table and gathered my papers from under his fingers. "These are my private documents. You have no right to look at them." "Mom," Mark said with a voice that dripped condescension, "we're worried about you. You've been acting strange, cutting us off without a word, not answering our calls, avoiding us. We think you might need professional help." Lauren stepped forward, her face softened into that fake tenderness she wore like a mask when she wanted something. She reached for my hand. "Maggie, honey, you're under so much stress. Maybe the loneliness is more than you realize. At your age, episodes of confusion are normal." The word confusion rang in my ears like a siren. That was their game. They weren't here to help me. They were here to declare me incompetent, to strip me of control, to seize my finances under the guise of concern. "I am not confused," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "I am clearer than I have been in years. And you are going to leave my house. Now." The lawyer stepped in, his tone professional but cold. "Mrs. Harris, I understand you feel overwhelmed. But your children have the right to intervene if they believe your decision-making ability is impaired. They've already documented several concerning behaviors." "Concerning behaviors?" The laugh that broke from my throat was harsh, almost cruel. "Like deciding that my money belongs to me? Like refusing to fund the lives of two grown adults who treat me like garbage?" Lauren flinched as though I had struck her. "We never treated you badly. Your family, everything you have will belong to us one day anyway. We're just speeding up the process." There it was, the mask torn away. In their eyes, I was already dead. I was just an inheritance in waiting, an obstacle between them and their future wealth. "Out," I said, pointing to the door. "All of you, get out of my house." Mark shot to his feet, his face contorted with the same spoiled fury he had shown as a child when he didn't get his way. "Mom, we can't just leave. We have obligations. The rent, the car payments, the credit card you co-signed. You can't just cut us off overnight." "Who says I can't?" My voice rose for the first time. For years, I paid rent on a place that wasn't even mine. I filled a refrigerator in a house where I wasn't welcome. I financed a life that had no room for me. And now you tell me I can't stop? Paul Fisher calmly placed a folder on the table. "Mrs. Harris, we've prepared a power of attorney that would allow Mark and Lauren to manage your finances more efficiently. This would just be temporary, until you're feeling better." I picked up the folder, walked to the trash can, and dropped it inside without opening it. "The only transition happening here is you walking out my front door." Lauren began to cry, but the tears were thin, transparent, the tears of frustration, not heartbreak. "You can't do this, Maggie. We counted on you. We made plans based on your help. We took on responsibilities because we knew we could depend on you." "Responsibilities based on my money," I answered, "not on my well-being, not on my happiness, not on my company, just on my money. And now that I've decided to live for myself, suddenly I'm a confused old woman in need of guardianship." Mark took a step closer. But I moved back. He was no longer the boy who had run into my arms after nightmares. He was a man, 35 years old, who looked at me not as his mother, but as an obstacle between him and a life of comfort he hadn't earned. "Mom," he said, his voice attempting remorse, "we made mistakes. The wedding was a misunderstanding. Lauren was nervous. I was under pressure. We can fix this if you just be reasonable again." Reasonable? The word burned in my throat. Reasonable means paying your bills while you shut me out of your life. Reasonable means pretending it doesn't hurt to be excluded from your wedding. Reasonable means I keep giving while you keep taking. No, Mark, I won't be reasonable anymore. The lawyer gathered his papers, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Harris, this is not over. If you are truly making irrational decisions due to mental decline, a judge can decide you need guardianship. And with that, I realized this was not just a family betrayal. This was war. That night I lay awake, but not with the restless sorrow that had haunted me for years. This was a different kind of sleeplessness, one laced with adrenaline and the fire of decision. I stared at the ceiling, every nerve buzzing with the realization that my own son and his wife had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. If they wanted war, they would get it, but it would be on my terms. By 6 in the morning, I was dressed and ready. My first stop was the office of attorney David Walker, a man I had met years before when I was managing Robert's will. Unlike Paul Fisher, the cold hired gun my children had dragged into my living room, David had a reputation for integrity, especially in cases involving the elderly. As I sat across from him, explaining the invasion of my house, the manipulation, the power of attorney they had tried to force on me, he shook his head with a grim familiarity. Mrs. Harris, he said, leaning forward, what your children attempted yesterday is, unfortunately, more common than most people realize. It's called elder financial abuse. And it's a federal crime. The fact that they entered your home without permission and rifled through your documents only makes it worse. The words calmed me and frightened me at the same time. Calmed me, because it meant I wasn't imagining the abuse. Frightened me, because it meant the problem was larger, uglier, and more dangerous than I had ever dared to name. We have to document everything, David continued. Every transfer you made, every gift, every instance where they pressured you for money. We'll change your will, and we'll put protections in place to ensure they can't touch your assets again. For 3 hours, we combed through my records. Every receipt and bank statement laid bare. When he tallied the numbers, David gave a low whistle. $33,400 in 3 years. Mrs. Harris, with that money, you could have traveled, remodeled your home, lived comfortably. Instead, you financed 2 grown adults who didn't even invite you to their wedding. I left his office with a plan. The first step, change every lock on my house. The second, install a full security system with cameras. The third, open a new account at a different bank, far from any fingers they could reach. And the fourth, the most important of all, was to start living the life I had postponed for too long. At the hardware store, I was greeted by Bob Summers, a man who had seen me too often in the past 3 years. Always shopping for something Mark or Lauren needed. This time, my request was different. Bob, I said, I need new locks for every door in my house. And I want the best quality you've got. He blinked at me, surprised, but didn't ask questions. While we talked, his son Ethan walked in. The young man who installed security systems for the store. Providence, I thought. Ethan, I said, I want the whole system. Cameras, alarms, everything. Price doesn't matter. They scheduled the installation for the very next morning. I felt a strange relief. Like I was finally stitching shut a wound I had allowed to fester. On my way home, my phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was not. Lauren. She must have been calling from someone else's phone after I had blocked hers. Maggie, she pleaded, please don't hang up. We need to talk like civilized adults. Speak, I said, my voice dry. Listen, she rushed on. I know you're upset about the wedding. It was a mistake. Mark and I talked, and we want to make it up to you. How about a special dinner at your house? Just us, celebrating the wedding together, cooking like we used to? The manipulation was so transparent I nearly laughed. Lauren, I asked, how much rent do you owe? Her hesitation told me everything. Well, 2 months. $1,000 total. But that's not the reason I called. We miss you. We love you. You're important to us. If I'm so important, I said coldly, why wasn't I important enough to be at your wedding? Why am I not important enough to receive a call that doesn't end in asking for money? When was the last time you called me just to ask how I was doing? There was silence. And in that silence lay the truth, never. Lauren, I said finally, I will only explain this once. For 3 years you've treated me like an ATM with feelings. You've ignored me, humiliated me, and used me, and when you told me I wasn't special enough for your wedding. That was the last straw. You made your choice, now I'm making mine. And I hung up. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I went to the beauty salon. Cynthia, my stylist, gasped when she saw me walk in. Mrs. Harris, I thought you'd forgotten us. I didn't forget you, Cynthia, I smiled. I forgot myself. I let them wash and cut my hair, color it, trim my nails, pamper me from head to toe. For the first time in years, I spent money on myself without guilt. When Cynthia handed me the mirror, she said, "You look beautiful, Mrs. Harris, but more than that, you look free." That evening, as I returned home, I noticed a car parked by my porch. My heart clenched, fearing another ambush, but when I approached, I saw an older woman seated on the steps, holding a mug in her hands. She stood as I came closer. "Mrs. Harris?" she asked softly. "Yes, that's me," I replied cautiously. "I'm Evelyn Brooks. I live next door. We've been neighbors for years, but we never really talked. Yesterday I heard shouting from your house, and I was worried. Are you all right?" Her concern pierced straight through me. Here was a woman who barely knew me showing more care than my own son. "Come in, Evelyn," I said. "I'll make you coffee, and I'll tell you a story you won't believe." We sat together in my kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee curling through the air. As I recounted everything, every transfer, every humiliation, every betrayal, she listened quietly, her eyes shining. "Maggie," she said finally, "you did the right thing. I went through something similar with my daughter years ago. I thought my job was to finance her adult life. But I learned the hard way it only pushed her further from me. When I cut her off, it was terrible at first, threats, guilt, manipulation, but after 6 months, she came back, she apologized. Now we have a real relationship based on love, not money." Her words settled deep in my heart. "Do you think Mark and Lauren will ever understand?" I asked. "Maybe," she said honestly, "maybe not, but that's no longer your responsibility. Your responsibility now is to live your life." That night, for the first time in years, I went to bed without worrying about their rent or their bills. I went to bed thinking about myself. And I slept like a child the next morning. Right at 8 o'clock, Bob and Ethan Summers arrived with their tools. I stood by as they changed every lock in the house. Every door that Mark and Lauren once opened freely. The sound of new metal sliding into place was the sound of my freedom being forged. Ethan installed cameras in the corners. Sleek black eyes that would watch my home day and night. "You'll have peace of mind, Mrs. Harris," he said as he demonstrated how the system worked. "If anyone tries to come in, you'll know immediately, and so will the police." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, an old woman installing defenses not against burglars, but against my own flesh and blood. But I felt no shame, only a strange calm. It was a practical measure to keep the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim. As they worked, my phone lit up again and again with unknown numbers. I ignored them all. Lauren was clever, borrowing phones to sneak past my blocks. But I had discovered a new strength, the strength of silence. For once, I owed no one an answer. When the locks clicked into place and the cameras hummed alive, I felt safer than I had in years. I decided to do something bold. I picked up the phone and called Diana in Chicago. My sister's voice, warm and surprised, filled my ear. "Maggie, it's been months. How are you?" "I'm good, Diana. Better than good. I've finally come to my senses." And I told her everything, from the secret wedding and the poisoned words, to the lawyer in my dining room and the decision to cut them off. She listened quietly, her breath steady on the other end of the line. When I finished, she said, "Maggie, it's about time." Every time we spoke, it broke my heart to hear you measure your worth in dollars. As if love could be bought. "I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how." Her words stung, but it was the kind of sting that cleans a wound. "There's something else you should know," she continued. "At family gatherings, Mark never spoke of you with love. It was always, 'Mom bought me this. Mom paid for that. Never once did he say, I miss my mom, or I love my mom. And Lauren, she spoke of you only in the future tense. When Maggie is gone, we'll remodel her house. When we inherit, we'll invest in the business. As if you were a stepping stone to their future. I sat at my kitchen table. Diana's words echoing like a bell. I had spent 3 years draining myself dry for people who weren't waiting for me to live, but waiting for me to die. That evening, the doorbell rang. On the new camera feed, I saw Evelyn standing on my porch, a mug in her hand. I opened the door, and she smiled warmly. I thought you might like some company. I welcomed her in, and over coffee she shared more of her story. My daughter once said the same things Lauren says to you. Evelyn admitted, you're like a second mom to me. We're special to you. Everything will be ours someday. They all read from the same script. Maggie. It's emotional blackmail dressed as love. We laughed at the thought of such a handbook existing. But it was a bitter laugh. Did you feel guilty? I asked. Every day for the first 3 months. She said honestly. But then I saw her adjust. She found a second job. Her husband stopped golfing every weekend and started working. They learned to live within their means. And more importantly, they learned I was a person, not a resource. Her words were balm on my wounds. For the first time, I saw a sliver of hope that perhaps one day, even Mark might see me as more than a walking wallet. The days passed quietly, and I began to taste a life of my own again. I visited Robert's grave for the first time in months, sitting in the grass beside him, whispering the truth I had been too ashamed to say aloud. I think I lost myself after you left. I confessed. I poured everything into Mark, thinking it would make up for his missing father. But in the process, I forgot who I was. The wind stirred, gentle and forgiving, and I felt for a moment as though Robert heard me. I cleaned his grave, laid fresh flowers, and for the first time in years, I lingered without hurry, savoring the peace of simply being. But peace is a fragile thing. When I returned home, 3 cars were once again parked outside, Mark's, Lauren's, and 2 others I didn't recognize. My cameras caught them pacing, gesturing toward my house. My pulse raced, but this time I didn't step inside. I called David Walker. Stay in your car, he instructed. I'm on my way, and I've already filed for a temporary restraining order. They have no right to be on your property. Minutes later, David arrived with 2 police cars. From my seat, I watched officers confront my son, saw Mark's angry gestures, saw Lauren cry again, though her tears no longer moved me. An officer came to my car window. Ma'am, it's safe to come out. Your visitors are leaving. Mark shouted across the street. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't call the police on your own son. I looked at him calmly. Family doesn't break into homes. Family doesn't threaten lawsuits to steal money. Family doesn't treat their mother like an ATM. Lauren screamed from the sidewalk. You'll pay us what you owe. You co-signed our bills. You can't abandon us. David stepped forward, his voice sharp. From this point on, all communication goes through my office. And I suggest you hire your own lawyer before making threats. Because we have full documentation of every payment Mrs. Harris ever made. They left, defeated but still circling like wolves. That night, Evelyn invited me into her home for dinner. I met her daughter, saw the gentle respect between them, the genuine warmth of a family that did not need money to bind them together. I left her house with tears in my eyes. Not from sorrow but from longing. I wanted that with Mark. I whispered. Evelyn put her hand on mine. Maybe you'll get it one day. She said, but first, he has to learn that you're a person who deserves respect, not a resource. The next morning, just as I thought life might quiet, the doorbell rang. On the camera, I saw a well-dressed young woman with a folder in her hands and a professional smile. She held out her ID. Good morning, Mrs. Harris. I'm Emily Scott, a social worker with Senior Services. We've received a report that you may be at risk and we need to conduct a wellness check. My blood ran cold. Mark and Lauren had escalated again. Now they were trying to bring the government into it. I let her in, wary of refusing. She sat primly in my living room and began reading from her notes. We've been told you've had significant changes in your financial behavior. Cut off communication with your family. Installed unnecessary security systems due to paranoia. And refused medical and legal help from your loved ones. Every word had been chosen carefully. A knife twisted to paint me as a senile woman in decline. I heard Lauren's voice in the phrasing. Manipulative and sweet. Dripping poison. Ms. Scott, I said firmly, I won't answer another question until my lawyer is present. She frowned. Mrs. Harris, this is only a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide. The words made my blood boil. I said I want my lawyer here. Within 20 minutes, David Walker walked through my door, his presence filling the room with authority. He checked her ID, then said coldly, Ms. Scott, unless you have a court order. This visit is harassment. My client is under legal representation. She is not required to answer. She hesitated, then stammered about reports from concerned family. David cut her off. The same family that tried to force her into signing a power of attorney? The same family that broke into her house and threatened her? If anyone here needs investigating, it isn't my client. He placed a folder on the table. The full record of every dollar I had given. Every manipulation documented. Ms. Scott read with growing unease. Finally, she looked at me. Mrs. Harris, do you manage your finances independently? Yes, I answered clearly. I can show you my accounts. My tax filings. Every document you need. Do I look like a woman incapable of living alone? My home is clean. I drive myself. I take only vitamins. I have friends. I have a life. David added, she has undergone full medical evaluation recently. She is in excellent mental and physical health. At last, Ms. Scott closed her folder. Based on this conversation and the evidence, I see no reason to intervene. I'll be closing this case. As she left, I exhaled slowly, but David's face was grave. Maggie, he said quietly, they're not done. They're desperate. Next, they'll take you to court. And I knew he was right in the weeks that followed. I learned what desperation looked like when it dressed itself in family clothing. Mark and Lauren stopped circling the house and instead began plotting behind closed doors. Weaving a web of lies they thought strong enough to trap me. One Thursday morning, David arrived at my house with a look on his face that made my stomach twist. Maggie, he said, setting his briefcase down heavily. They've filed a lawsuit for incompetence. They're asking the court to assign you a legal guardian. They want control of everything. The words fell like stones. I had known in some part of me this was coming, but hearing them spoken out loud felt like stepping into a nightmare. Can they do that? I asked. They can try, David said, and they've brought so-called evidence. Witnesses who claim you've been acting erratically. A pharmacist who supposedly says you're mismanaging your medications. Even a neighbor claiming you've been unstable. I felt my pulse quicken. But I don't even have prescriptions beyond vitamins. And my house is spotless. My bills are paid. What neighbor would say such a thing? Richard Davis across the street. David replied grimly. Apparently he signed a statement. And your pharmacist, Mr. Green, provided something too. I couldn't believe it. Mr. Green had always been polite. I need to see him. I said, this doesn't make sense. Together we went to the pharmacy. Mr. Green looked up in surprise when I confronted him. His cheeks flushed red. Mrs. Harris, I didn't realize. Your daughter-in-law came in. Said she was worried about you. She asked about your medications. I told her you only bought vitamins and aspirin. But she insisted that meant you weren't taking proper care of yourself. Then she handed me a paper to sign. Said it was for health insurance. I never knew it was for court. My throat tightened. Lauren's talent for twisting words had ensnared even him. Then you'll put it in writing? I asked. You'll tell the truth? Of course, he said quickly, shame all over his face. I'm so sorry. From there we went to Davis's house. He answered the door with a sneer. Come to harass me now? Mr. Davis, David said evenly, you signed a statement saying my client is unstable. Can you explain exactly what you've observed? I don't need to explain. Everyone can see it. Installing cameras like she's living in a prison. Yelling in the street. Having strangers over all the time. Those strangers are my friends. I said, my voice trembling with fury. And those cameras were installed after your neighbors broke into my home. I yelled because I was defending myself. Davis scoffed. That's what a crazy person would say. It was useless. He was blind to context. Content to play his part in their theater of lies. That evening, David laid out the plan. Maggie, we need an independent evaluation. My colleague, Dr. Susan Moore, is one of the best in assessing mental competence. If we have her report, their accusations crumble. The next morning, I sat across from Dr. Moore, a woman in her 50s with kind but sharp eyes. For 2 hours she tested me, memory questions, logic puzzles, financial reasoning, even problem-solving exercises. She asked about my daily routines, my social life, my health. When we finished, she closed her file and looked at me warmly. Mrs. Harris, you are well above average for your age. Your cognitive abilities are excellent. You are not only competent, you are thriving. Relief washed through me, but it was bittersweet. To need such a test because of my own son's lies was a cruelty I could never have imagined years ago. That night, Evelyn gathered me with her friends from the garden club, women who had each lived their own version of betrayal. Maria had cut off a brother who used her as his personal banker. Carmen had turned away a daughter who only visited when she needed cash. Alfreda, wise and 80 years old, had rewritten her will after hearing her grandchildren talk about her as if she were already gone. We sat in Evelyn's living room sharing stories, voices rising with outrage and laughter, sometimes both at once. What hurts most, I admitted, is realizing I never had the love I thought I did. It wasn't real, it was bought, and bought love isn't love at all. Alfreda took my hand. Maggie, true love cannot be purchased. If you had to pay for it, it was never yours. Her words struck deep, carving out the final illusion I had clung to. I had not lost my son that day at the wedding. He had been gone long before, replaced by someone who measured affection in dollars and debts. You know what I've learned? I said, my voice steadier now. Loneliness surrounded by people who don't love you is worse than being alone. At least when I'm alone now, I'm in good company. They all laughed softly, raising their glasses in a toast. To clarity, to freedom, to women who had learned, some too late, that boundaries are not cruelty but survival. Still, the night before the court date, I cried, not tears of fear, but of grief. I wept for the boy I had raised, the boy who once clutched my hand in the park. I wept for the family I had dreamed of, the one that never existed. And as the tears dried, something stronger remained, an iron determination. They would not strip me of my dignity. They would not take my freedom, not while I had breath in my body. The trial was set for 3 weeks later. I rose before dawn on that day, putting on my best black suit, the one Robert had once said made me look formidable. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and saw not a frail old woman but a soldier going into battle. Today, I knew, was not just about money or control. It was about the right to live as a human being, to be respected as more than a walking wallet. It was about the value of a life lived with dignity. When David arrived to go over strategy one last time, he put it plainly. Remember, Maggie, the burden of proof is on them. They have to show you are incompetent. We only have to show the truth, that you are not. At the courthouse, I saw Mark in a brand new suit, probably bought with borrowed money. His jaw clenched as he avoided my eyes. Lauren wore black, her face arranged as though she were attending a funeral. In a way, perhaps she was, the funeral of the relationship they had destroyed with their own greed. And so we entered the courtroom. Where my life and my freedom would be weighed. The courtroom was cold that morning, the air thick with tension. Judge Robert Miller presided with the calm authority of a man who had seen hundreds of families tear themselves apart between those four walls. As I sat at the table beside David, I told myself over and over, this is not only about money. This is about my dignity, my right to live free, my right to be more than a source of income. Mark and Lauren sat across the aisle with their lawyer, Paul Fisher, an elegant man with the polished air of someone who had argued cases like this before. His opening statement was smooth and practiced. Your Honor, Mrs. Margaret Harris has shown alarming signs of mental decline in recent months. She has cut off her family without rational explanation. She has installed elaborate security systems out of paranoia. She has isolated herself under the influence of neighbors and an opportunistic attorney. This family seeks only to ensure her well-being. Every word was a dagger, twisting my independence into a symptom of illness. In his story, my strength was paranoia, my boundaries were confusion, and my friendships were manipulations. Their witnesses came first. Lauren walked to the stand, her eyes glistening with rehearsed tears. She told the court how I had changed, how I had become hostile and paranoid, how heartbreaking it was to see me slip away. She painted herself as the loving daughter-in-law, devastated by my supposed decline. Maggie has always been like a second mother to me, she said, her voice trembling. Watching her mental health collapse has been unbearable. We only want to help her. I wanted to stand and shout, "Liar," but I sat still, my hands folded, my heart pounding. David's cross-examination cut through her act like a knife. "Mrs. Harris," he said, "when was the last time you called my client without asking her for money?" She faltered. "Well, we talked about many things." "A specific date, please?" She flushed, unable to answer. "Is it true," David pressed, "that you and your husband married without inviting her?" Lauren's face darkened. It was a very small ceremony. "Is it true that when my client asked about the wedding, you told her you had only invited special people?" Her eyes flickered with anger. Those words were taken out of context. "What context?" David asked calmly. "Makes it acceptable to tell your mother-in-law she is not a special person?" The silence that followed was louder than any confession. Next came Mark, my son. Watching him place his hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth was one of the most painful sights of my life. Because I knew what he would do with that oath. He spoke of how generous I had been, but claimed I had become irrational, erratic, easily influenced. He painted me as a woman manipulated by outsiders, unrecognizable from the mother he once knew. David's voice was steady when he cross-examined him. "Mr. Harris, how much money have you received from your mother in the past 3 years?" "I don't know the exact amount," Mark muttered. "Would $33,400 sound about right?" Mark shifted uncomfortably. "She's always been generous." "And how many times in those years have you visited your mother without asking her for money?" The silence stretched until the judge raised an eyebrow. Mark had no answer. "Is it true you entered your mother's home without permission and rifled through her private documents?" "We were worried about her," he said quickly. "Is it true you brought a lawyer into her home to pressure her into signing a power of attorney?" "We wanted to help manage her finances." "Mr. Harris," David interrupted, his voice sharp, "do you, at 35 years old, require your 71-year-old mother's help to pay your rent?" Mark's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Their so-called witnesses followed. Richard Davis spoke of my strange behaviors, but when pressed, admitted he had never spoken to me directly and based his claims only on what he saw from across the street. Dr. Andrew Lehman claimed my refusal to undergo his evaluation was proof of mental decline. But David countered with the official evaluation from Dr. Susan Moore, which confirmed my excellent mental health. Then it was our turn. Mr. Green testified first, explaining how Lauren had tricked him into signing a paper under false pretenses. Dr. Moore took the stand next, describing in detail my flawless results on cognitive tests. Bob Summers confirmed the rationality of my decisions at the hardware store, describing how clear and precise I had been about security measures. Evelyn and my new friends from the garden club testified to my vitality, my clarity, and the way I had built healthy social connections after cutting Mark and Lauren off. Finally, it was my turn. I rose slowly, walking to the stand, feeling the eyes of the courtroom on me. 72 years of life weighed on my shoulders, but so did 72 years of strength. I swore to tell the truth, and for once, the truth was finally on my side. David guided me gently, allowing me to tell my story. I spoke of the $33,400 drained from me in 3 years. I spoke of being excluded from the wedding, of hearing the words, "only special people," of the humiliation that burned deeper than any wound. I spoke of their attempts to declare me confused, their lawyer in my dining room, their tears of manipulation, their threats. "Mrs. Harris," David asked at last, "why did you decide to stop supporting your son and daughter-in-law financially?" "Because I finally understood that what I was receiving was not love. I said, my voice clear. It was a transaction disguised as family. My money was welcome, but I was not, and I will not pay for the privilege of being humiliated. Do you regret your decision? I looked across the aisle at Mark. At the boy who was once my son. Only that I didn't make it sooner. Paul Fisher tried to rattle me in cross-examination, suggesting that Evelyn and David had manipulated me, that my boundaries were paranoia, that my independence was confusion. But I answered every question calmly, directly. For the first time in years, I did not tremble. When the testimonies ended, Fisher made his closing plea, insisting that I was a vulnerable old woman led astray, that my sudden independence was proof of decline. David's rebuttal was simple and devastating. Your Honor, what we have seen today is not incompetence. It is courage. My client has shown clarity, strength, and resolve. The plaintiffs have shown nothing but frustration at losing access to her money. This case is not about her well-being. It is about their greed. Judge Miller retired to deliberate. 2 hours passed, each minute stretching like an eternity. When he returned, the room hushed. His face was serious, but his words were clear. After reviewing all evidence, it is obvious to this court that Mrs. Margaret Harris is fully in possession of her faculties. Professional evaluation confirms her competence. Her financial decisions are rational, even if painful to her family. The court denies the request for guardianship in its entirety. The words rang in my ears like a bell of freedom. I had won, not just the case, but my life back. Mark and Lauren's faces twisted with anger as they whispered furiously with their lawyer. Lauren's eyes shot me a look of pure hatred. Mark glanced at me once more, and for a fleeting second I thought I saw regret. But it was too late. Whatever we had once been had died in that courtroom. That evening, Evelyn organized a gathering at my house. We toasted with wine, we laughed, we cried, and Alfreda summed it up best. Maggie, she said, lifting her glass, today you didn't just win a trial. You won yourself. And she was right. For the first time in decades. The future was mine alone. The days after the trial felt unreal. As though I had stepped out of a long, suffocating tunnel into fresh air. For the first time in years, I woke without dread gnawing at my chest. No phone calls demanding money. No guilt dragging me to the bank. No fear that my own home might be invaded by people who called themselves family. Instead, there was silence, and it was the most beautiful silence I had ever known. Mark and Lauren didn't call again. I heard whispers through mutual acquaintances that they had moved into a smaller apartment. Lauren had even taken a job for the first time in years. Perhaps adversity would teach them what my generosity never could, the value of honest work. But whether they learned or not was no longer my burden to carry. I turned my focus to my own life. The life I had postponed for decades. The first step was selling the house that had become haunted by too many memories of manipulation. With David's guidance, I sold it and moved into a bright, sunlit apartment near the city center. The windows opened to a view of the park, where every morning I could watch children run and laugh, a reminder that joy still existed in the world, even if it no longer lived under my roof. Half of the money from the sale, I donated to organizations fighting elder abuse, the very crime I had endured. It gave me strength to know that my story might help protect others. The other half, I reserved for myself, not to hoard, but to live. For the first time since Robert's death, I began to truly live. I traveled, Paris in the spring, with blossoms cascading along the Seine, Florence in the summer, where I stood in front of paintings that Robert and I had once dreamed of seeing together. Barcelona in the fall, where I walked the winding alleys and listened to the sea crash against the shore. At 72, I was no longer waiting for someone to give me permission to enjoy life. I gave it to myself. When I returned home between trips, I filled my days with joy I had forgotten existed. I joined an art class and set up a new easel in my living room, painting flowers with colors as bold as the emotions I finally allowed myself to feel. I joined Evelyn's garden club, not because I had a garden anymore, but because I had friends who understood me. I volunteered at shelters, where my story became a shield for women who had once believed, as I had, that love could be purchased with sacrifice. And slowly, I felt the past loosen its grip. I no longer woke in the middle of the night haunted by the words, "only special people." Instead, I woke eager to decide what I wanted to do with my day. My time was mine. My money was mine. My life was mine. Sometimes, in the quiet of evening, I would step out onto my balcony and look at the stars. I thought of the woman I had been only a year before, afraid, manipulated, believing she had to buy love from her son. That woman no longer existed. She had died in the fire of betrayal, and in her place stood someone new, someone stronger. And I thought of Robert, of the promise we had made, long ago, to build a life of love and dignity. He was gone, but the lesson remained. True love does not demand payment. True love does not ask you to shrink yourself to feed someone else's greed. True love honors who you are, even when you have nothing material to give. As for Mark and Lauren, I let them go. Perhaps one day they would look back and see the truth of what they had done. Perhaps not, but my forgiveness was not a gift for them, it was a release for me. I forgave them in silence. And then I moved on, never looking back. Now, when people ask me my story, I tell them this: my name is Margaret Harris. I am 72 years old, and I have finally learned the most important lesson of my life. Freedom is not too expensive. Dignity is not too costly. And the greatest love story I will ever live is the one where I learned to love myself. If my story touched you, you can support me with a small donation so I can continue writing and sharing more of these life journeys. Thank you, truly, in advance. And tell me, what would you have done in my place? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So please share them with me in the comments. I'm always curious about your opinions. And let me know where in the world you're listening from. For more true life stories like this one, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories waiting for you. With heartfelt greetings, until next time.